Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat there, spine straight, hands clasped, eyes forward and yet invisible. The room buzzed with voices, maps sliding across the table, pens scratching, men leaning in over strategies. But when she spoke, the words seemed to dissolve before reaching anyone's ears. It wasn't new. She had learned long ago what it felt like to vanish in plain sight, to be measured, weighed, and quietly dismissed. But that didn't sting anymore. What stung was the silence inside her chest, the silence she had buried, the silence that had once screamed with grief. Her gaze drifted to the window. Beyond it, the desert stretched, hot wind carrying dust like secrets no one dared to speak aloud. She blinked once, slowly. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. And yet she had something none of them carried. A fire she couldn't name. A reason she had never spoken aloud. Not to them, not to anyone. The commander's voice broke the hum. Targets confirmed. Perimeter sweep at dawn. No mistakes. This one matters. Heads nodded. Papers shuffled. Boots scraped against concrete. But her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was somewhere else. Somewhere years ago, where a different voice, softer, had whispered promises she could never fulfill. The memory of a face she could never see again. The soil where she had buried more than one life. She swallowed hard and forced herself back into the now. They didn't know why she volunteered for this mission. They thought it was discipline, ambition, maybe even desperation to prove herself. They were wrong. It was revenge. But not the kind that explodes in rage, not the kind sung about in stories. This was quieter, sharper, a revenge so intimate it no longer burned, it froze. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a blade. And tomorrow, in the desert, that blade would find its mark. She stood when the briefing ended. No one looked her way, not even once, and still she smiled faintly. Being unseen had its advantages. In the hall the lights flickered, a hum of generators beneath the floor, boots echoing, voices bouncing down steel walls. She moved through them like a ghost, her shadow long under the dim light. Her gear was waiting in the locker. She touched the rifle first, cold metal against her palm. She ran a thumb over the carved initials near the stock. The others didn't know what they meant. She had never told them. She never would. The initials were a name that had once laughed with her in childhood, a name that had once stood between her and the world, a name that was now carved into wood because the body that carried it had been left behind in a field no one talks about. She breathed in, steady, controlled, just like she had trained herself. Quiet on the outside, quiet on the inside, her old instructor used to say. She wondered if he knew how literal that had become. Later that night, she sat alone in the mess hall, the hum of refrigerators and the faint clink of utensils filling the emptiness. A young private slid into the seat across from her. He was barely 20, freckles still scattered across his face, eyes that hadn't yet seen enough to grow cold. "You don't talk much, do you?" he asked, his voice awkward, almost apologetic. She shook her head. Not much to say. He nodded, chewing on his lip, first time out. She didn't answer. She let him believe whatever made him comfortable. He filled the silence with nervous chatter, a girlfriend back home, a letter he hadn't answered yet, a fear he wouldn't admit to the others. He laughed at himself halfway through. "You probably don't care. I'm just talking to not think about it, you know." She finally looked at him, really looked. The tremor in his fingers, the way his voice cracked when he tried to sound casual, the way his eyes darted, never steady. "I know," she said softly, just that, 2 words, enough to make his shoulders ease. And for a moment she envied him, because he still had something to fear losing. She had nothing left. When she returned to her bunk, sleep didn't come. It never did. Dreams had stopped visiting years ago. Instead, she lay still, staring at the steel ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the base settling under desert winds. And in the silence she heard echoes, Not of laughter, not of comfort, but of screams. She turned over, pulling the thin blanket tighter. She hated the dark, not because it hid things, but because it revealed them. At 400 the call came. Boots hit the floor, belts fastened, rifles checked, radios tested. The desert was waiting. As the convoy rumbled out, engines growling, the air was thick with grit. Dawn painted the horizon in bruised colors, purples and oranges bleeding into each other like an old wound refusing to close. She sat in the back, rifle across her lap, eyes forward. No one spoke, only the roar of tires on gravel, the smell of fuel, the weight of what was coming. She thought of him again, the one whose initials were etched into her rifle, the one they had taken from her, the one she could not bury properly because there had been nothing left to bury. Her jaw tightened. The desert stretched endlessly, and somewhere out there in the labyrinth of sand and stone was the man responsible. They thought this mission was about intelligence gathering, securing routes, stabilizing zones. For her, it was something else entirely. The convoy halted, orders barked, they dismounted. And in that moment, as her boots hit the dirt, she whispered beneath her breath, words no one else could hear. "I will not fail you." The wind answered, carrying dust across her face, stinging her eyes. She blinked once, and then she moved. The silence inside her had grown louder, almost deafening. But she knew what silence could do. It could bury grief. It could sharpen courage. And in the desert, silence was deadlier than sound. Why did the desert feel louder than the city she left behind? Every step pressed against the earth with a sound that only she seemed to hear. The crunch of grit under boots, the hum of radios, the distant whir of drones circling overhead. Even the air itself seemed restless, shifting with winds that carried the taste of dust and iron. She kept her head down, rifle snug against her shoulder strap, eyes scanning the ridges. The others moved in formation, disciplined, precise, but predictable, and predictable was dangerous. Her mind never stopped calculating. Angles, distances, cover, exit routes. She had been trained to see not what was, but what could be, and right now she saw too much. The lieutenant's hand shot up, fist closed. The column froze. Silence fell except for the whisper of sand sliding down slopes. She lowered to one knee. The desert stretched before them, flat, empty, too empty. Her eyes narrowed. Somewhere beneath the wind she thought she heard it, a tick, a faint mechanical pulse, almost hidden. She felt her stomach tighten. "IED," she whispered. The lieutenant turned, surprised. "Where?" She didn't answer immediately. She let her breath slow, her eyes sweep. A flash of unnatural color beneath the sand, a reflection that didn't belong. She raised a finger, pointing toward a cluster of rocks 20 meters ahead. Two engineers moved forward, careful, precise. Within minutes, their faces confirmed what she already knew. She looked away. The others muttered relief, some even laughed nervously, but she felt no relief, only anger, because the trap wasn't random, it was deliberate, a signature. Her fists clenched. She knew this handiwork, too careful, too calculated. It wasn't just an explosive, it was a message. The convoy rerouted, tension buzzing now through every step. Radios carried clipped words, commands sharpened by fear. But in her chest, a different rhythm pounded, recognition, the kind that burned and froze all at once. The man they were after, the one she had carved into her rifle, was here, close, watching. Her silence thickened. Hours blurred into heat. The sun burned mercilessly overhead, shadows shrinking until there was nowhere left to hide. Sweat dripped down brows. Canteens drained, voices thinned to whispers. At a ridge they halted for rest. Soldiers sprawled in shade, tearing open rations, gulping water. Laughter forced through cracked lips. She stayed apart, perched on a rock, eyes scanning the horizon. She saw movement, not clear, not certain, just the hint of a figure far beyond the shimmer of heat. Was it real, or was her mind pulling ghosts from the sand? The young private from the mess hall sat near her. His face was pale, lips dry. He fiddled with his helmet strap like it was the only thing keeping him tethered. "You ever think about what it's like?" he asked quietly. She didn't turn. What's like? "You know, dying out here, whether it hurts or if it just stops." She let the silence stretch between them heavy. He exhaled. "Sorry, dumb question, I shouldn't." "It doesn't hurt," she said suddenly, her voice flat, certain. He stared at her. "How would you?" She cut him off with a look, cold, final. He looked down, nodding quickly. He didn't ask again. But she knew the truth. It did hurt, in ways that didn't end even after the body was gone. She carried proof of that. Every breath she took was a reminder. The lieutenant called the team together. Maps unfolded, fingers traced routes, a village ahead, sparse, half abandoned, potential harbor for the enemy. They moved again. The village rose from the desert like bones, mud walls crumbling, windows hollow, silence so complete it pressed against the ears. Dogs barked in the distance, then went silent. Something felt wrong. Her skin prickled. She scanned rooftops, alleys, doorways, too still, too empty. Even decay usually left traces of life, a voice, a movement, a sound. But here, nothing. The unit fanned out, boots crunching over broken stones, radios crackling softly. She stopped in the center of the street, her breath caught. On the wall ahead, a mark, painted in black, a symbol she knew too well. Her throat tightened. It was his. Her fingers brushed the rifle stock, over the carved initials, over the promise she had sworn into wood. He was here, he had been here. She almost called out, almost broke her silence, but she swallowed it down. To say his name would be to break the only weapon she had left, the secrecy of her grief. The lieutenant barked orders, teams split, sweeping buildings, doors kicked open, dust rising, coughs echoing. She entered a narrow alley, shadows deepening. Her boots stirred silence. The air was heavy, metallic, suffocating. And then a sound. Faint, a scrape. She froze. Her rifle lifted steady, eyes cutting through darkness. A figure darted at the edge of vision, too fast to catch, too deliberate to be a mistake. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She ran, boots pounding against stone, corner after corner. The alley twisted, narrowed, and then gone. Only emptiness. She stopped, chest heaving. The wind shifted, carrying laughter, distant, mocking, not loud but enough to know. He wanted her to follow. Her grip on the rifle tightened until her knuckles whitened. The others didn't hear it. They didn't see. To them, this was just another abandoned place. But to her, this was a stage, and she was already on it. By nightfall, they made camp on the village outskirts. Fires flickered low. Men murmured in circles. Radios hissed with static. She sat apart again, rifle across her knees, eyes never resting. Every shadow stretched too long. Every sound lasted too long. She thought about the laughter, how it had twisted in the air like smoke, how it had sounded like the past she couldn't escape. She thought about her brother, his face, his voice, his body broken where she couldn't protect him. And she thought about tomorrow, because she knew with a certainty that burned through her veins that tomorrow would bring her closer. Closer to him. Closer to the silence she craved. The desert had swallowed many before, but it had never swallowed her. Not yet. She whispered again to no one, to the wind, to the soil, to the silence inside her. "I will not fail you." The night gave no answer, only stars, cold, watching, endless. And in that endless silence she finally let her eyes close, not in rest, not in peace, but in preparation. Because she knew he was waiting. And so was she. Why did she wake before everyone else? The camp was still. Bodies wrapped in blankets, rifles leaning against rocks, breath rising in faint clouds beneath the night's last chill. But her eyes snapped open at the slightest sound, a shift in the wind, a rustle too sharp to be natural. She sat up, hand on her rifle. Silence pressed heavy. Stars blinked above, fading into the gray of dawn. She listened, motionless. There it was again, a scrape, distant, faint. She rose, careful, boots silent against sand. Her breath was steady, though her chest felt tight. She moved beyond the circle of sleepers, past the dying fire. Shadows clung to walls. And then she saw it. A figure far at the edge of vision, slipping between ruins. Her pulse hammered. She didn't call out, didn't wake the others. She moved alone, rifle ready, steps measured. The air felt sharp, each inhale cutting like glass. She followed, through alleys, over rubble, across courtyards drowned in silence. The figure was always ahead, just far enough, just fast enough, leading her. She stopped, her instinct screamed. This was wrong. The laughter from yesterday echoed in her head. A game, a trap. And yet she stepped forward. Because some traps weren't meant to be avoided. Some were meant to be walked into. Her boot crunched over broken stone. The sound bounced, too loud in the silence. She winced, adjusting her grip. The alley opened into a wide courtyard. Walls collapsed, doors broken. No one, nothing. Empty. Except for a single mark on the wall, painted in black, the same symbol, his symbol. Her breath caught. She raised her rifle, scanning every corner, every shadow, every crack. The silence thickened. And then the crack of a rifle. The bullet slammed into stone inches from her head. Dust exploded, stinging her eyes. She dropped, rolling behind cover. Her pulse thundered, ears rang. She pressed her cheek to the ground, scanning. Where? A second shot, sparks from metal too close. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She lifted the scope, peering through shattered stone. A flash, a muzzle glint, rooftop. Her finger tightened. But then she froze. Because the face that appeared behind the scope wasn't his. It was a boy, no older than the private back at camp. Thin, eyes hollow, skin drawn tight, barely able to hold the rifle steady. Her throat tightened. She hesitated, just long enough for him to fire again. The round cracked past her, burying itself in the wall. Her breath shook. Training screamed at her. Reflex demanded it. Survival demanded it. But her silence, her grief, it held her hand back. For 1 second, 2. Then instinct took over. Her shot rang out, the boy fell. The courtyard went still. Her chest heaved, her eyes stung. She forced herself up, moving toward the body. He lay crumpled, the rifle still clutched in his two small hands. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound would ever come again. She knelt, staring. Her fingers brushed the weapon. It wasn't his style, not the man she was hunting. This boy was bait, disposable. Her jaw clenched. Behind her, voices rose, boots pounded. The unit had woken, drawn by the shots. The lieutenant stormed into the courtyard, eyes hard. What the hell happened? She didn't answer. She just stood, rifle heavy in her hands. The others muttered, eyes flicking between her and the boy. Some with pity, some with judgment. The private from the mess hall looked longest, his face pale, his lips trembling. She turned away. The lieutenant barked orders, cutting the tension. Pack up, we're moving, now. They left the courtyard behind, but she carried it with her. Every step, the boy's eyes burned in her memory. She had pulled the trigger, but it wasn't the kill she wanted. It wasn't the face she had carved into her rifle. It was just another ghost added to her silence. Hours later, they reached higher ground, ridges overlooking the valley below. The sun beat down, merciless. Dust swirled in waves. Scouts moved ahead, scanning. The lieutenant studied maps, muttering. She stood apart as always, watching, waiting. Her mind replayed the moment, the boy's face, the hesitation, the shot. Was this what her silence had grown into? A weapon that couldn't distinguish, a fire that burned even the innocent. Her chest ached. The private approached quietly, his voice low. "You didn't have a choice." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "Yes, I did," she whispered. He swallowed, unsure what to say, then nodded, stepping back. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The valley stretched endlessly. Somewhere out there he was waiting. The man who had taken her brother. The man who had laughed at her grief. And she knew the closer she got, the more ghosts she would gather. That night, camped on the ridge, she lay awake again. The stars above felt colder now, the silence heavier. She remembered her brother's laugh, the way he used to push her forward when she doubted herself, the way he had told her once, "You'll never break. You bend, you stretch, but you don't break." But what if she already had? She closed her eyes, gripping the rifle against her chest. Her whisper cracked this time. "I won't fail you." But even as she said it, she wondered, who was she really speaking to? Him, herself, or the silence that consumed them both? The wind howled over the ridge, carrying sand, carrying echoes. And beneath it, she thought she heard it again. Laughter. Not loud, not close, but there. He was near. And tomorrow she would find him. Or he would find her. Why did the valley feel like it was breathing? From the ridge, the land below shimmered under the weight of heat. Dust twisted in spirals, carried by invisible currents. Shadows stretched long and sharp across rocks. The unit crouched low, scanning through scopes, murmurs clipped and cautious. She adjusted her position, pressing her cheek against the rifle stock. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a tunnel, ridges, cracks, and movement barely perceptible. She waited, breath shallow, heartbeat steady. But something gnawed at her chest. The silence wasn't right. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. The lieutenant whispered into the radio. A scout reported no visible activity, no sign of hostiles. The maps showed this stretch as a ghost corridor, abandoned, uninhabited, safe enough to cross. Safe. She frowned. Safe never sounded real. The private crouched beside her, his face pale but eyes trying to mimic steadiness. He whispered, "Do you ever feel like it's too quiet?" Her gaze didn't move from the scope. Always. His lips pressed tight, nodding, like he wanted her certainty to become his. The lieutenant signaled. Movement. The unit descended into the valley, boots crunching on loose gravel. The sun pressed heavy, heat radiating off rock faces. Radios crackled with check-ins. Every step echoed, too loud, too exposed. Her eyes scanned the cliffs, the shadows, the ridges. Something was wrong. She felt it in her bones. And then the world erupted. The first blast tore through the ground ahead, fire and dust swallowing the lead squad. Screams split the air. Shrapnel clanged against rock. Gunfire followed, raining from the cliffs. Muzzle flashes like sparks in the shadows. The valley exploded into chaos. She dropped, rifle swinging up, scope locking. Her breath slowed as the world tunneled again. Targets appeared, silhouettes darting from cover, rifles raised. One shot, another, each pull of the trigger was precise, deliberate. Bodies dropped, weapons clattered. Her silence turned deadly. But the ambush was relentless. Bullets shredded stone. Dust clouds swallowed vision. Voices screamed for cover, for medics, for air support. The private crawled beside her, face streaked with dirt, eyes wide with terror. "We're pinned, we're." "Breathe," she snapped, steady. "Stay low, watch your flank." Her voice cut through his panic like steel. His nod was frantic, but his breathing slowed. She pivoted, scanning, and then her stomach turned cold. On the cliff above, a figure stood apart from the others, calm, still, watching. Not firing, just watching. Even through the haze, she recognized the posture, the tilt of the head, the silence wrapped around him like a cloak. Him. Her pulse thundered, her grip tightened. She raised the rifle, scope centering on his chest. But before her finger could squeeze, he moved, slipping back into shadow, vanishing. Her breath caught. The boy had been bait, the laughter had been bait, and now this, another game. She clenched her teeth, fury burning. But there was no time to chase ghosts. The ambush raged. The lieutenant's voice roared commands, his throat raw. The engineers scrambled to disable hidden charges. Medics dragged the wounded into shallow cover. She fired again and again, each shot controlled, each kill cold, but the silence inside her cracked with every pull. Because every face she dropped wasn't his. The battle stretched into eternity, minutes that felt like years. The sun-scorched skin, bullets carved air, screams etched themselves into stone. When it finally slowed, when the last muzzle flash dimmed, the valley was littered with wreckage. Blood soaked into dust. Smoke rose in thin spirals. The unit regrouped, fewer in number, faces gray with exhaustion. Some limped, some bled, some stared at nothing, eyes hollow. She stood among them, rifle heavy in her hands, breath steady but chest burning. The private sat against a rock, trembling, a bandage wrapped around his arm. His eyes found hers, searching. "We made it." She didn't answer because she didn't know. The lieutenant's voice was hoarse. "We hold here. Reinforcements in 24 hours. Dig in." The men groaned but obeyed. Trenches carved, positions fortified, radios patched. She stayed apart as always, watching the cliffs, watching the shadows where he had stood. Her silence roared inside her. She wanted to scream, to demand why he hadn't shown himself, why he played with her grief like it was a toy. But she swallowed it, pressed it down. Later, when night fell, the valley grew colder. Fires burned low. Wounded groaned in their sleep. The smell of blood lingered, thick and metallic. She sat alone, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the ridge. And then she heard it. A whisper carried on the wind, not words, just laughter. Her skin crawled. She rose, stepping away from camp into the darkness. Her boots crunched softly, her shadow stretching long in the moonlight. She reached the valley edge, staring into blackness. The cliffs loomed, silent, impenetrable. Her chest ached, her grip trembled for the first time. She whispered, voice raw, "Show yourself." Only silence answered. But she knew he was there, watching, waiting. Her silence cracked again. And for the first time in years, she felt afraid, not of dying, not of pain, but of breaking. Because if she broke, what was left of her brother would die with her. She pressed the rifle to her chest, eyes burning. The initials carved into the stock dug into her palm. "I will not fail you," she whispered again, but the words shook, weak. The wind carried laughter once more. And she knew this was far from over. Tomorrow he would come closer. And tomorrow her silence might finally shatter. Why did the storm break on that night of all nights? Rain lashed against the corrugated tin roof of the outpost, drowning out the faint radio chatter. Inside, the dim light flickered, shadows stuttering across weary faces. She stood near the window, her hand resting on the damp sill, watching streaks of lightning split the horizon like veins of fire. Every boom of thunder seemed to echo the pressure in her chest, a storm within a storm. They were supposed to wait for the extraction order. Quiet, patient. But patience was never simple when silence carried the weight of grief. She had buried her heart too many times already, and tonight, the soil inside her felt heavy with ghosts. The squad sat scattered, some playing cards with trembling hands, others staring at nothing, lost in loops of memory. Ramirez hummed under his breath, a tune too soft to catch, almost prayer-like. O'Donnell leaned back, his eyes closed, whispering words to a photograph tucked in his chest pocket. For a fleeting moment, the war seemed less about strategy and more about fragments of lives trying to survive the waiting. She wanted to speak, to say something human, anything that could pull them closer together. But the words stalled, always stalled. She had learned to keep grief silent, to let her eyes speak what her voice could not. Then the radio cracked, a burst of static that silenced even the storm. A voice, clipped and calm, bled through. Phase 2 begins at dawn. Hold position. Target is moving south. Do not engage until confirmation. Her stomach twisted. She had expected this. But she hadn't told them, hadn't told anyone, that the target they spoke of was tied to her own story. A name she had memorized long before the mission. A man whose decisions had carved scars across her life. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face. No one noticed the flicker in her eyes, not yet. She closed her fist. She had buried grief before. But vengeance, that seed had grown differently, sharp, unruly, and wild, and now it pulsed with the storm. At dawn, the rain slowed, leaving the air thick, metallic, and damp. The world outside smelled of wet earth and gun oil. She tightened the strap of her vest, each buckle a ritual of resolve. "Looks like hell's mud out there," Ramirez muttered, trying to break the tension. She managed a faint smile but said nothing. Words felt fragile before the weight of what was coming. They moved out as the sky bruised purple and gray, dawn dragging its tired body across the mountains. Their boots sank in the softened ground, sucking with each step like the earth itself wanted to hold them back. She walked in silence, every sound amplified, the distant drip of rain from leaves, the crunch of mud, the hollow thud of her heart. The mission was clear: track, observe, confirm. But her mind replayed fragments of another life, her brother's laughter, the warmth of a kitchen table long gone, the news that shattered her world. The man they were after had ordered the raid that destroyed her family's village years ago. A name passed through intelligence reports, a shadow she had chased in silence. And now, the war had delivered him into her hands, though no one else knew it. The squad stopped to rest near a ridge. Below them, the valley stretched in folds of mist, rivers threading like veins of silver. O'Donnell pulled out his photo again, showing it to Ramirez with a grin. "My kid's first bike. Sent me this last week." His voice cracked with pride and ache. She looked away, her jaw tight. Loss made her body ache in familiar ways. Pride, too. She envied that O'Donnell still had someone waiting, that he carried hope like a talisman. "Hey," Ramirez nudged her. "What about you? Got anyone back home writing you letters?" The question landed heavier than intended. She met his gaze briefly, then shook her head. "Not anymore." There was a pause, filled by wind threading through the trees. Ramirez didn't press, but O'Donnell gave a quiet nod as if saying, "I get it." Maybe he did. Maybe they all did in their own fractured ways. She turned her eyes back to the valley, hiding the storm behind her silence. By midday, the squad found tracks, fresh, deep impressions in the mud leading toward the southern path. They followed, rifles at the ready, nerves strung tight as wire. The forest thickened, swallowing sound. Birds stilled. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. She moved like shadow, her sniper's eye scanning, heart calibrated to patience. Yet beneath her calm, rage stirred. She imagined him, this man they hunted. His face blurred, but his actions were carved in brutal clarity. The night her family vanished. The smoke. The silence after. "Stay focused. Don't let it show." She repeated the mantra inside over and over. Hours dragged, the hunt stretching into a quiet war with time. At one point, Ramirez slipped on the wet ground, cursing under his breath. They all chuckled softly, tension breaking for just a second. Even she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But peace shattered when a shot cracked from the tree line. Bark exploded inches from O'Donnell's head. Instantly, the squad dove for cover, mud spraying. Her pulse spiked, not with fear but with clarity. So close, too close. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the valley. They returned fire, bursts flashing through mist. Leaves shredded, dirt kicked up. Voices barked commands, half heard, half felt. She crawled to position, eyes narrowing through her scope. The world tunneled, sound muffled, vision sharp. Shadows moved ahead, too many, too fast. This wasn't just a passing patrol. It was an ambush. "Hold line," Ramirez shouted. But she wasn't listening. Through the shifting figures, she caught sight of someone, taller, slower, commanding, a gesture, a stance. Her chest tightened. Could it be him? The moment stretched, fragile, electric. But before she could confirm, the figure vanished into smoke and trees, leaving only chaos behind. Rage flared, hot and dangerous. She steadied her breathing, forced herself back into discipline. Not yet. Wait. Bullets hissed past, snapping branches. She picked targets cleanly, one by one, precision forged from years of buried fire. Each shot was a release, but never enough. Finally, silence settled, broken only by the hiss of rain on leaves. Bodies lay still. The squad regrouped, breath ragged, eyes wide. "That was no coincidence," O'Donnell muttered, spitting mud. "They knew we were coming." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her thoughts spun on that shadow she had seen. The possibility that her enemy, the man who stole everything, had just slipped from her grasp. Night fell heavy, draped in wet darkness. They set camp in the ruins of an old stone outpost, its walls broken, roof half gone. Firelight flickered across tired faces, painting them in orange and shadow. Ramirez cleaned his rifle, muttering curses at fate. O'Donnell stared at his photo again, lips moving in silent promise. The quiet between them all was not emptiness but weight, a shared knowing that tomorrow could take any one of them. She sat apart, her rifle across her knees, eyes locked on the flames. The storm outside had calmed, but inside her the fire raged. She replayed that glimpse, that shadowed figure. Was it him? Or was grief playing tricks again, feeding her illusions with hunger? Her hand tightened on the stock of her rifle. She had sworn to herself long ago, if fate delivered him, she would not hesitate. Yet here, surrounded by men who trusted her, the silence of her secret pressed like stone. Ramirez broke the quiet. "You ever think about what will be after all this, if there's even a world left for us?" No one answered at first. The fire crackled. Wind whispered through broken stone. Then O'Donnell spoke softly, almost to himself. "I just want to teach my kid how to ride a bike. That's it. Doesn't seem like much, but that's what keeps me going." The words lingered, simple, human, powerful. She swallowed hard. What kept her going? Not hope, not dreams, just a promise whispered to graves. A promise that burned louder than fear, deeper than survival. She looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds. Silent, endless. And for the first time that night she let herself wonder, when vengeance was finally done, would there be anything left of her to keep going? The fire popped, sparks lifted, silence thickened. Tomorrow, she knew, the storm would rise again. And with it, the chance to face the ghost she had chased for so long. But tonight she carried the weight alone. How much longer could the silence stretch before it broke? Dawn bled into the ruins where they had camped, the first light a pale gray wash that made every scar on the stone walls more visible. She sat awake, rifle balanced on her knees, eyes heavy but unblinking. Sleep had never come, not with the storm inside her louder than the night around her. Ramirez stirred first, groaning as he sat up, muttering about his back. O'Donnell followed, clutching his photo, tucking it carefully back into his vest before anyone could see the trace of damp on its corner. Whether from the rain or his eyes, no one asked. The world outside was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no insects buzzing, just stillness, like the earth itself was waiting for something. She noticed it. So did Ramirez. He froze halfway through lacing his boots, eyes darting. "Something off," he whispered. She nodded. Her fingers brushed the rifle's grip like it was the only thing tethering her. Her breath slowed, every sense sharpening. The valley below seemed peaceful in the gray dawn, but peace here was never trustable. They moved out anyway, their orders clear. Follow the tracks, confirm the target's movement, report when ready. But every step felt heavy, loaded with unseen eyes. Halfway down the ridge, O'Donnell stopped. "Wait," He crouched, brushing the mud, boot prints fresh, too many not their own. Her chest tightened. She leaned in, tracing the impressions with her eyes. Larger formation, heavier packs. A group had passed not long ago. She swallowed, a strange mixture of dread and anticipation rising. Could he be here, close enough that the earth still carried his weight? Her heart quickened. The squad pressed on, rifles raised, moving like shadows across the misted forest. The tracks led them deeper, to where the trees thickened and the air turned damp with hidden tension. Then faintly voices, carried on the wind, rough and low. She froze, motioning the others down. Through the trees, figures moved, 7, maybe 8, armed. They weren't just passing, they were waiting. Ramirez cursed under his breath. O'Donnell clenched his jaw. But her eyes fixed on the man in the center. Taller, broader, commanding with simple gestures. His stance was familiar, too familiar. It was him. She knew it before her mind even caught up. Her blood roared in her ears. The ghost she had chased, the name that haunted every report, he was here, breathing the same damp air. She steadied her scope, lining him in the crosshairs. Her finger hovered on the trigger. And froze. Not because of doubt, but because of the others around him. If she fired now, the squad would be exposed, ambushed in a heartbeat. She could not risk them, not Ramirez, not O'Donnell, not when they trusted her silence. So she held her breath and lowered the scope, for now. Her silence was a prison and a weapon, both at once. They retreated unseen, slipping back into cover before the enemy patrol shifted. Safe for the moment, but tension clung to them like damp cloth. Intel didn't say anything about numbers this high, Ramirez muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. O'Donnell spat in the mud, frustration written across his face. Feels like we're walking into their hands. She kept her silence, but her mind spun. She had seen him, not a shadow, not a trick of grief, him, and she had let him live for the squad's sake. The war inside her deepened. She had promised herself vengeance would never falter, yet here she was, betraying her own oath, for them. Ramirez caught her staring into the trees. "You okay?" She blinked, pulling herself back. "Fine." The word was small, clipped. But inside she was anything but fine. That night they camped in silence, no fire this time. Just darkness and whispered breaths. The forest around them creaked and moaned as though alive, listening. She lay awake again, staring at the shifting shadows. Memories invaded. The raid, the fire, the smoke curling into a sky that refused to answer her screams. Her brother's voice silenced forever. And over it all, his name. The man she had just seen, standing alive and whole while her world had been turned to ash. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She wanted to rise, to go alone, to finish it now. But duty tethered her. Duty and the faces of the men who trusted her silence. When she finally closed her eyes, it was not sleep that came, but visions. Her brother's laughter breaking, then silence. The man's silhouette in her scope, her finger trembling. Over and over the loop played. At dawn, the world shifted again. A message cracked through the radio. Confirmation expected within 24 hours. Extraction window will not reopen. Complete your task or abort. Ramirez cursed. O'Donnell muttered something about suicide orders, but she said nothing. Her silence was louder than either of them. 24 hours, that was all. They moved quickly, tension in every step. Through ravines, over ridges slick with moss, under the watch of hawks circling above. The forest thickened, and with it, the weight of choice pressing on her chest. Finally they saw it. A camp, not large but fortified enough to mean permanence. Smoke curled from fires, men moved in routine, weapons stacked neatly, and there, among them, was him. Alive, breathing, within reach. Her pulse pounded. Ramirez whispered, "That's him, the target." She hesitated, her mouth was dry. Yes. The word tasted like blood. She had spoken truth, but not the whole of it, not the fire beneath. The squad watched, waiting for orders. She swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We confirm, we hold, we wait for clearance." They nodded, accepting. None of them knew the storm inside her. None of them knew that this wasn't just a mission, it was her reckoning. The day crawled. Hours stretched into torment as they observed, noted patterns, watched guards rotate, meals served. Every small detail carved into her mind. She was patient, snipers had to be. But her patience now was fire locked in ice. O'Donnell whispered about his kid again, how he wanted to send home something real, proof of progress. Ramirez muttered prayers under his breath, old words in a language she didn't understand. And she said nothing, because if she spoke the truth might spill. The truth that this mission wasn't about intel or strategy. It was about her family, her brother, her own broken silence. When night fell, she made her choice. While the others rested, she slid her rifle into position, scope aligned. Breath steady, heart pounding. There he was, standing near the fire, laughing at something, his face illuminated. The man who had destroyed her world. Her finger curled around the trigger. But then movement. O'Donnell, stirring in his sleep, clutching the photo of his child even in dreams. Ramirez muttering his prayers, restless even in exhaustion. Her chest constricted. If she fired now, it wouldn't just be vengeance. It would be war. Her squad would be dragged into fire they couldn't survive. Her oath pulled one way, her humanity another. She froze, trembling. The crosshairs hovered on his chest. Her breath hitched. She whispered so soft no one could hear, "Not tonight." And she lowered the rifle. The night stretched on, heavy with silence. She lay awake, staring into the dark, her body rigid with the war she hadn't fought. For the first time she questioned herself, not her skill, not her resolve, but her very soul. Was vengeance still strength, or was it weakness dressed as fire? The camp below slept, the forest whispered, and she for once felt the weight of silence not as armor but as a wound. Tomorrow would decide everything. What sound wakes a soldier first, the crack of danger or the whisper of conscience? She couldn't tell, but when her eyes opened before dawn, her chest already tight, she knew the day had arrived, the day she could no longer postpone. The camp below was stirring, faint smoke curling up as shadows moved with early chores. She lay prone on the ridge, rifle steady, eyes sharp. She could see him clearly now, every line of his face. The man who had once been nothing more than a ghost in reports, a name tied to grief. Now he was flesh, breathing, laughing with his men. The sight of him alive was like salt in wounds that had never healed. Her finger grazed the trigger. All it would take was one squeeze, one breath timed with the stillness of her body. Years of silence, of bottled rage, would erupt in that single bullet. And yet she stopped, because just then O'Donnell shifted behind her, raising his binoculars. "That's the confirmation," he whispered. "We've got him. We sent it up and this is over." She swallowed hard, forcing her throat to move. "Not yet," she murmured. O'Donnell frowned. "What do you mean, not yet? This is it. We radio in, extraction comes, command takes care of the rest." But she didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the scope, her heart beat loud in her skull. What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that no command, no strike, no distant decision could ever balance the scales of what had been taken from her. This wasn't about orders. It was about something far older, far deeper, a promise whispered in smoke. The hours crawled. They stayed hidden, watching, documenting, waiting for a signal that never came. At one point Ramirez nudged her, his voice low. "You've been quiet even for you, something eating at you." Her jaw clenched. She wanted to tell him, wanted to say, "Yes, he is the reason I am here. The reason my family is ash. The reason silence is all I have left." But the words stayed buried, as they always did. Instead she said, "Just tired." Ramirez studied her for a beat, then nodded. But his eyes lingered longer than usual, as if he sensed the storm beneath her calm. By midday, the camp below grew restless. Men moved in hurried patterns, gathering equipment, loading vehicles. Something was changing. The target was preparing to leave. Ramirez cursed under his breath. "We'll lose him." O'Donnell looked to her, waiting. "What's the play?" Her chest tightened. They trusted her judgment, her silence. She should have called command, should have passed the decision upward. That was the right thing, the soldier's thing. But the voice inside her whispered louder. "If he leaves, you may never see him again. Never have this chance again." Her hands trembled. "Hold position," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "We wait until the last possible moment." The men obeyed, but unease shadowed their eyes. The chance came sooner than expected. A convoy of trucks roared to life, dust and diesel choking the air. He appeared in the center vehicle, stepping inside with the calm of a man untouchable. Her pulse surged. This was it. She lifted her rifle, sight aligning with his chest. The world narrowed. No sound, no movement, just the thrum of her heart and the crosshairs steady on the man who had destroyed her world. Her finger curled. And then O'Donnell's voice, soft, human, almost breaking. "My kid, he's waiting for me. Let's make it back, yeah." The words pierced her like shrapnel. For a split second her vision blurred, not with weakness, but with the crushing weight of choice. If she fired, there would be no clean ending. The convoy would explode into chaos, her squad caught in the firestorm. Maybe O'Donnell wouldn't make it back to that kid. Maybe Ramirez's whispered prayers would go unanswered. Her vengeance, their lives. Her breath hitched, and she lowered the rifle. The convoy rumbled away, engines fading into distance. Her body shook, not from fear, but from the unbearable silence of restraint. Ramirez exhaled hard. What the hell was that? We had him. Her throat closed. She couldn't explain, couldn't tell them the truth. O'Donnell looked at her, confusion softening into something else, recognition maybe, as if he saw in her eyes that this was more than a mission. But he said nothing. He just tucked the photo back into his vest, as if reminding himself of the stakes. They withdrew in silence, slipping back into the forest. Night fell heavy again. The forest pressed close, branches clawing at their path. They camped without words, exhaustion weighing them down. She sat apart, staring into the dark, replaying the moment, her finger on the trigger, her brother's laughter echoing in memory, the convoy disappearing into the trees. She had failed, or had she chosen? She didn't know. Ramirez eventually broke the silence. "You ever think maybe we're not meant to carry it all? Maybe some things are too heavy for one person?" She glanced at him, startled by the truth in his tone, but she said nothing. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the silence wash over her, heavy and endless. Morning came. A message cracked over the radio. "Target relocated, coordinates updated, final window open, do not fail." Her body stiffened. Final window, the last chance. They moved again, every step heavier than the last. Through thickets, across streams, up ridges that scraped their lungs raw. At last they reached a clearing. Ahead, a village half abandoned, roofs sagging, walls crumbled. And in its center, guards, vehicles, and him. Closer than ever. The sight nearly broke her. Memories surged, the smell of smoke, the screams, the silence after. Her brother's face, her family's absence. All of it pulsed in her veins, a fire that demanded release. But beside her, Ramirez whispered another prayer. O'Donnell touched the photo in his vest. 2 lives, fragile and human, tethered to her silence. Her chest ached, her soul split. Was vengeance strength, or was restraint the truest courage? The rifle trembled in her hands. The forest held its breath. And she knew the next choice would define not only her life but theirs. The scope steadied. Her finger curled. The silence deepened. And the world waited. What is the sound of a life deciding? Not a gunshot, not even a word. Sometimes it is silence, the kind that weighs heavier than any explosion. She lay prone in the clearing, rifle fixed, breath locked. Through her scope, the man stood in the heart of the ruined village, barking orders to his guards. His face was clearer now, etched with arrogance, carved by years of violence that had touched her life long before. The world around her blurred until only he remained. Her brother's voice echoed in memory, laughter cutting through a sunlit field. Then the smoke, the raid, the silence where that laughter had lived. It was all here, tangled in her breath as she steadied the rifle. Her finger curled on the trigger. But then O'Donnell shifted beside her, whispering, "On your mark, we trust you." She froze. "We trust you." The words sank like lead. Her vengeance was hers alone, but trust, it was theirs, fragile and human. To fire meant unleashing war in this clearing, a storm that might consume Ramirez's whispered prayers and O'Donnell's dream of teaching his kid to ride a bike. The man below laughed, smoke curling from his cigarette. He was real, alive, the architect of her grief. And yet, if she killed him now, she would not just end his life. She would define theirs. Her breath trembled. Do I bury grief in silence, or do I let it consume us all? She closed her eyes just for a second. When they opened, she lowered the rifle. Ramirez hissed, "What the hell are you doing?" Her voice was calm, steady. "Not like this." O'Donnell stared, then slowly nodded, as if he understood something neither of them could say aloud. They pulled back, moving silently through the trees, leaving the ruined village behind. Her chest burned with the weight of what she hadn't done. Every step felt like betrayal, not of her mission, but of her promise to the graves of her family. And yet, a strange lightness crept in beneath the weight. She hadn't given vengeance the power to consume more lives. She hadn't let silence turn into fire that devoured everything. But the war inside her wasn't over. That night, as they sheltered in a hollow of stone, rain whispering overhead, Ramirez finally broke. "You had him right there. Why?" The firelight caught her eyes. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because some wars end with silence, not bullets." He stared, frustration etched into his features. But after a long beat, he looked away. Maybe anger, maybe respect, maybe both. O'Donnell, though, studied her differently, as if he saw not failure but something harder, a strength born not from fire but from restraint. The next morning they received new orders, extraction confirmed, mission declared successful, the target's location marked, intel gathered, command was satisfied. The irony cut deep. Success had nothing to do with her choice. They would never know how close she had come. They would never know that the silence she carried had nearly broken them. On the helicopter out, the rotors thundered, drowning thought. Ramirez leaned back, eyes closed, perhaps trying to bury frustration. O'Donnell clutched his photo, staring at it with a faint smile, a promise alive. She sat between them, the roar filling her chest. And in the noise she found herself thinking not of vengeance but of the soil of silence she had carried for years. It had grown something she hadn't expected. Not closure, not peace, but courage of another kind. The courage to walk away from the fire. When they landed back at base, the world seemed unchanged. Dirt, dust, tents flapping in wind. But inside her something had shifted. She stepped onto the tarmac, the weight of her rifle slung across her shoulder, and for the first time her silence didn't feel like a prison. It felt like choice. In the debrief she said little. Facts, observations, nothing more. She kept her secret buried where it had always been. But this time it was different. She wasn't burying grief to hide it. She was planting it, letting it transform into something else. Later, alone, she stood by the wire fence at the edge of camp. The horizon stretched wide, painted in bruised colors of dusk. She breathed in the dust, the distant hum of generators, the faint echo of laughter from somewhere behind her. She thought of her brother, of what he would have wanted, not vengeance, not her silence turning into a bullet, but her dignity, her humanity still intact. She whispered into the wind, "I kept my promise, just not the way I thought." The wind carried the words, soft and unseen. Days later, O'Donnell found her by the mess hall. He didn't say much, just handed her a folded piece of paper, a drawing, crayon lines uneven but proud, a stick figure on a bike smiling wide, his kid's latest letter. "For luck," O'Donnell said softly. She stared at the paper, her throat tight. For the first time in years, she smiled, not wide, not loud, but real, a small victory carved into silence. Ramirez walked by, shaking his head, muttering about stubborn people. But even he, she noticed, smiled faintly as he passed. Life was fractured, but it was still life. That night, as the camp settled under stars, she lay awake, listening to the hum of the world. For once it didn't feel hostile, it felt patient. She closed her eyes and let herself feel, not grief, not rage, but something quieter, a fragile hope. Her story wasn't about fire. It wasn't about the bullet she didn't fire. It was about the silence she chose to keep. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. When the video of her story ends, the final image lingers. A woman backlit by dusk standing alone at the fence line, her rifle slung at her side, her face calm, scarred but unbroken. No words, just silence. And in that silence, courage like wildfire.